Coming up on Mississippi Roads, it's Links to the Past. We visit the Biloxi Lighthouse on the coast. We travel to Roanoke in Oxford to explore Faulkner's ghosts. And we tour the African American Museum in Hattiesburg.
Down Mississippi Road. Mississippi Road.
Hi, welcome to Mississippi Roads. I'm Walt Grayson. In this show, we're going to be taking a look at some of the links to the past that we still have standing in Mississippi. And we're headquartering ourselves at one of the prime examples of that, and that's the Old Capitol Museum in downtown Jackson. This museum is one of the prime examples of Greek Revival public architecture in the nation, much less the state. It is a national landmark. If you can imagine in 1839, when they first started building the Old Capitol, that the legislature was meeting in a little wood frame building a couple of blocks away, and it's been torn down eons ago. And then arose this magnificent edifice on that first bluff overlooking the Pearl River swamps, with its towering columns and its copper dome and these limestone blocks as a facade on the front. This was the most magnificent building in the state of Mississippi at the time. It's withstood the storms of the Civil War, it's withstood the storms of politics, and it's still standing today as one of our landmarks. And our first story, we're going to travel to another landmark that's withstood storms, the physical kind, and I know you're familiar with it. And it's about 170 miles south of where I'm standing right now. The Biloxi Lighthouse. It's another one of our links to the past.
One of the reasons the lighthouse was built was the fact that this was a seafaring town. And because it was a seafaring town, you had a lot of commerce going in and out of Biloxi. Even from New Orleans, we had the paddle wheels coming and bringing tourists as well as goods to the city. So when they built this lighthouse in 1848, it became that beacon that they knew they could come into safe harbor by looking at the light and following the light. The lighthouse itself, it was lined with bricks. That's the way these things were set up. Instead of building the brick type lighthouses, they decided to build this iron one, but they reinforced it with brick on the inside all the way up, all the way to almost to the top of the 55 stairs that goes to the top where the light is.
They chose cast iron. It was an experimental material at the time, and they were trying to decide whether it was actually going to work well for lighthouses. We were only the third one built in the United States, and actually the first one in the Deep South. And then in 1860, a hurricane had eroded the foundation of the lighthouse so bad that it was leaning 2 foot off of center, putting it out of service. So it remained like that until after the Civil War.
Right after the Civil War, around 1866, 1867, the metal lighthouses in the United States, the lighthouse keepers for the U.S. government decided that they needed to paint these things to prevent the rust on them. So they painted them all black, which is fine and good, but what happened was in the daytime they were landmarks as well for the fishermen and the shrimpers and the boatmen of the day. So they couldn't see the land where the lighthouse was because that white stood out against the tree background. So they asked them to turn it back, paint it back to white.
You know, there were stories for years that it was painted black in memorial for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, but that was just a story that was made up many years later to tell the tourists coming up down from Chicago to make them feel better about the whole Gulf Coast and being in the Deep South at the time. It is actually the only one of that series of lighthouses that survived all of the storms.
you can actually go up into the lighthouse, and you'll notice, one of the first things you'll notice is their watermarks.
After Hurricane Katrina, when we did the restoration, which was about $450,000 worth of work on the structure, was to add a hurricane exhibit and actually paint it the high water mark for different, not every storm that's hit the lighthouse, but some significant ones over the years. The lighthouse was hit by a hurricane just a few years after it was built. And so we've got a mark for that. It really puts it in perspective. And then you have the line for Hurricane Camille, and then you get the mark for Hurricane Katrina, which is, you know, another 6 foot above that. So it really kind of helps you understand how different the storms have been over the years and their impact on the coast. The lighthouse where it is today, it's in the middle of US Highway 90, but at the time it was put there, it was actually that was a jetty of land that stuck out, just a kind of a rock, basically a rock pile, and they built the lighthouse right there on that sand jetty, and there was a bayou right next to the lighthouse where the water would come in, and it was a little deeper here, so it made kind of the natural channel coming into Biloxi from Ship Island, where your deep water port was. So that was the reason it was chosen to be right here.
When it was originally built, there was no road. Back then, there was no beach roads. There was paths and shell roads that went to people's houses, but there was no municipal road on the area. It wasn't until in the late 1800s that they began to build roads next to the lighthouse. In the 1950s, that's when they full-laned the highway and built the lane south of it. And to do that, they had to do a lot of fill of sand all the way to the beach where the beach extends now. It's also in the 1930s, they built a seawall, and that's when they did some of the extension they did on the soil south of the lighthouse. So it became the first lighthouse that's set in the middle of a major highway.
It really is the symbol for Biloxi because that really is an identifying structure. There's no other lighthouse quite like it. And plus, it is a sign and a symbol of resilience for our community. After Katrina, when you saw all of the damage, and you just saw piles and 15, 20, 30-foot high piles of debris everywhere, and you got to this site, and all of the structures around here were gone, but the lighthouse was still standing. I think the community took it on as a sign that, yes, we can survive and we will survive.
This is the House of Representatives chamber in the old Capitol Museum in downtown Jackson. Lots of important legislation came through here, including the 1839 Married Women's Property Act, which guaranteed that a widow inherited her husband's property at his death. First time that had ever happened in the United States. This is also the room from which Mississippi seceded from the Union in 1861. And this is also where our present state constitution was passed in 1890. In the Senate Gallery of the Old Capitol Museum is Mississippi's Hall of Fame. These are people who have made significant contributions to Mississippi over the years. There's 130 portraits hanging here, including that of Mississippi's only Nobel laureate, William Faulkner. Faulkner's home, Roanoke in Oxford, is visited by thousands of people from all over the world every year. But if you talk to the people who work there, they'll tell you pretty quickly, not all of those visitors are from this world.
I'm Edie Green. I'm the Assistant Director of Television at Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I was part of the crew on a shoot of Conversations with Ken Burns here at Roanoke a couple years ago.
Bruce Levingston was interviewing Ken Burns in Faulkner's library. We closed down that day for the interview. All was quiet on the set. We had a sign on the door. We're trying to be as quiet as we could.
I was sitting here on the stairs because the conversation was taking place next door and there wasn't room for the producer nor I to be in the room. And all of a sudden there was this clanging.
Everyone was listening to Ken Burns give these wonderful answers to his interview questions. And all of a sudden you hear this loud clatter, and we were like, what was that?
I jumped, I turned, I wanted to see what it was, and there was a phone that was in the middle of the floor. But it had been on the chair. The assistant curator had been sitting in the chair. She'd gotten up and left, and she left her phone behind. I suppose it could have slipped off the chair, but it seemed to have gone a long way for just a phone sliding off a chair. And it seemed to make a lot of noise for a phone just sliding off of a chair. Later on when we watch the show, you can hear the phone hitting the floor in the interview.
This is an interesting life story that has on its cusp the sense of what can you do for others, and that's the service that we spend a lot of time paying lip service.
The assistant curator came back and she was kind of making a puzzled face at why her phone was on the floor, but after the interview was over she said, "Oh, that's the ghost." And we kind of laughed, and then the curator came in and he said, "Oh, that ghost, he always acts up when we have people here, when we're doing something." What really amazed me about it was how matter-of-fact they were. They were just, yeah, that's the ghost, yeah.
Who wouldn't want it to be haunted, right? I mean, honestly, everyone would want it to be haunted. You know, every ghost story starts out the same way. An old house in a tragedy, you know, and we just haven't found the tragedy yet.
The house closed for huge renovations for about 2 years in the early 2000s. I think it was 2002. And to prepare for the renovations, Bill went around to all the rooms and took photos of how all the furniture was, just to make sure that they could put everything back the way it was. And he took this photo in Estelle's bedroom, Faulkner's wife. Looking at it, he noticed something pretty strange. This is a blown-up version of the photo, and then we have the original here in the newspaper clippings book. But when you're looking out of Estelle's window, there's a bench outside. And in this photograph, there are a couple things missing that are actually outside, and there's something that's not usually there. Looks like a person is sitting on the bench, or it's more like a wispy kind of cloud. Looks like it's on the bench. So the photo was taken in this room. This is Estelle's bedroom. It was taken from the window that's on the right side of her bed. So it's facing the backyard.
And through Estelle's window, there seems to be two figures in the backyard. One sitting on the bench, like I am now, this very bench, and then someone standing next to it. But also, what's interesting is what's not there. The grape arbor is gone, the house in the back isn't there, the hedges are missing, and a tree's gone. It's very strange. You can't miss that tree when you go through the window, but it's not there in the photograph. There's just negative space behind them. It's very strange. There's, from the sky to the ground, there's nothing but black space. We've had real live ghost hunters come out here and do some ghost hunts out here. But they didn't find much, especially in the house. The only time anyone's ever found anything is in the little servants' quarters behind the house.
Some visitors sometimes say that they felt a presence in different rooms, particularly the guest bedroom.
But the probability, I don't know. There's some strange things that have happened.
I was opening up one morning, and part of our opening procedures involves going in Faulkner's bedroom and turning on the light because you can't access the light switch from out here. And I noticed his pillow was sunken in, and it looked like just like your pillow looks after your head has been laying there all night. I noticed it was sunken in a perfect head shape, and I was like, okay, that's weird. And so I just fluffed it up and then tried not to think about it for the rest of the day.
He loved to tell ghost stories. His niece even wrote a book about this ghost stories he used to tell at Roanoke, called The Ghost of Roanoke by Dean Faulkner Wells. He did. He enjoyed telling ghost stories. He enjoyed reading ghost stories as well. The Judas Shegog story was based right here at Roanoke. It's the story of Judas Shegog, who was unlucky at love and flung herself off the balcony and was buried underneath a magnolia tree in the garden. And we tell the story, and it's a retelling of Mr. and Mrs. Faulkner's courtship. It's a great story. I wish he would have written it down, but he didn't.
Everyone wants an old house to be haunted, and everyone gets excited by stories about ghosts. I don't believe it's William Faulkner's ghost. I think he's resting peacefully. It seems more like a child to me, kind of a more playful presence.
I got to work here, though, so I talked myself in it to not being haunted at all. I don't think so. I think William Faulkner moved on a long time ago. I don't believe it. If it is haunted, I don't believe it's him.
The last restoration project here at the Old Capitol Museum was done in 2009, primarily to repair damage from Hurricane Katrina that hit in 2005. This display kind of explains what was going on here before, and then also explains historic preservation in Mississippi. The way I get it, the difference between restoration and reconstruction is restoration tries to take a building back to the way it looked originally, which is what they did with the Old Capitol, and it pretty much looks that way, especially on the outside. In our next story, we're going to visit another building that's been restored, and this is the African American History Museum in Hattiesburg. Interestingly enough, the museum is housed in the only surviving USO building in the United States that was exclusively for African American troops, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. And just for fun, we're going to follow some high school students through and find out what they learned as they toured.
This building opened March 22nd, 1942 as a USO for African American servicemen during World War II. Of course, during World War II, the military was segregated, and that's why they had a USO specifically for African Americans. A USO is basically where soldiers go to relax. It was their home away from home.
After the end of World War II, it was given to the city of Hattiesburg, and it being in the black neighborhood, it became our community center.
This building fell in disrepair, and it was actually on a list to be demolished. And there was a group of veterans that knew the significance of this building, and they said, we can't let that happen. There was a partnership that was formed between that committee and the Hattiesburg Convention Commission, and so they decided that it would be a museum chronicling African Americans in the military. When you go into the museum, the first quote said, there is no war fought by within the U.S. that African Americans did not participate in. It starts with the American Revolution and we end with the War on Terror.
There's very few people really know that the first casualty of the Revolutionary War was a black man, Christopher Attucks. He was a freed slave.
A lot of the stories that we have in our museum you wouldn't find in any other museum, just because we do focus on some of those local Mississippians, and a lot of our visitors are from Mississippi, and they want to know about those in this area that helped pave the way for them and that helped break barriers.
All right, when you walked in this area, since you learned about Cathay Williams, what do you notice in the center? It's a woman. They had something called the Women's Army Corps. This right here is Ruth Bailey Earl. She was a part of the Women's Army Corps, and she's a Hattiesburg native. This Red Ball Express took place within World War II, and one of the things that you can see at this mirror image behind us, or this painting, is a series of trucks going along on a convoy, and they're transporting things. What kind of things that you think that they are transporting? Weapons, ammunition, okay? Food, okay? Water. Those are things that they need. Now, I really hope that you paid attention to everything that I just said, because you all are going to have to take a quiz. You all are going to do, I'm going to have students to take turns and read the questions on the screen, and you all help them answer, okay? So you're going to turn right for false and turn left for true. You know your left from your right, correct? Someone read for me. Said it's true. Very good. Hit the red button for me. Thank you. Now we have General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who was a 4-star general in the Air Force.
And when they formed the Tuskegee Airmen, he was a ranking lieutenant colonel, so they placed him in charge, the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen. Dr. John People was the president of Jackson State University. He was a black member of the original Montfort Point Marines, but they were never used in combat. Here again, they were trained for that, but still that idea of fighting for freedom and for another country and you not free per se was in the back of their mind. The Triple Nickel was a black airborne unit. They did not go to combat. Instead, they were stationed in Oregon, Washington State, and they became firefighter jumpers.
We are currently standing in World War II. We're going to go through a timeline from when we in the military went from a segregated army or military into a desegregated military. If you look on your left, you'll see a timeline of the events that took place up into the Executive Order 9981, which was how we got from desegregated to segregated to a desegregated military. So you'll see that on your left.
The opportunity for it to tell the story, especially to Afro-Americans, who you are and who your forebears were, their dedication and commitment to this nation in time of war.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this show. But before we close, let me urge you to come visit the Old Capitol Museum in downtown Jackson sometime. There are displays in here that take us all the way from territorial days through modern day, from the Civil War through the Civil Rights era. This is our story. This is our heritage. This is our history. And on top of that, it's free. Downtown Jackson, the Old Capitol Museum. And if you'd like information about anything you've seen in the show, contact us at mpbonline.org/Mississippi Roads. And then while you're at it, make sure you like our Mississippi Public Broadcasting Facebook page. Till next time, I'm Walt Grayson. I'll be seeing you on Mississippi Roads.
Down Mississippi Road, Mississippi Road.
Mississippi Roads is made possible in part by the generous support of viewers like you. Thank you.
You know, we really enjoy bringing you Mississippi Roads every week, and we really appreciate you watching. And tell you what else we appreciate too, is those of you who contribute generously to Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Because when you do, you not only keep shows like Mississippi Roads on the air, but all the other productions MTB does. Please go to our website, mtbonline.org, and click Donate Now in the top right corner. Thank you for helping us serve our state. Because like we say, Mississippi is our mission.